The photograph is legendary. Lieutenant Commander Donald Shepard crouches on a river patrol boat, drawing back a flaming arrow aimed at a bamboo hut concealing a Viet Cong bunker. The date, December 8, 1967. The location, Bassac River, South Vietnam. Most people seeing that image think it's AI. It's not. Americans actually used bows, arrows, and crossbows in Vietnam for specific tactical situations where firearms created more problems than they solved. Today, we're examining the documented cases of archery weapons in Vietnam. Not widespread use, but specific instances where modern soldiers reached back to medieval technology because it was the right tool for the job. Lieutenant Commander Donald D. Shepard served with the Navy's riverine forces patrolling the Mekong Delta's waterways in 1967. His river patrol boats faced a recurring tactical problem that conventional weapons couldn't solve effectively. Viet Cong forces constructed fortified bunkers along riverbanks, often concealed inside bamboo huts or covered with vegetation. When patrol boats approached, these bunkers would open fire with machine guns and small arms. The standard response was returning fire with the boat's mounted weapons, 50 caliber machine guns, grenade launchers, and small arms. This worked against exposed positions, but bunkers concealed inside structures presented difficulties. Firing into bamboo huts with high-velocity rounds often failed to ignite them. The bullets would punch through without starting fires. Grenades could work, but required precise placement. Destroying the concealing structure to expose the bunker underneath took time and ammunition. Shepard experimented with a solution that would have been familiar to medieval siege warfare: fire arrows. He obtained a compound bow and constructed arrows with flammable materials attached to the heads. When ignited and fired into bamboo structures, the arrows embedded in the walls or roof, starting fires that quickly consumed the dry bamboo. The technique worked. The photograph taken on December 8, 1967, shows Shepard employing this method against an actual enemy position on the Bassac River. According to the original photograph caption, Shepard found that the arrows shot from river patrol boats are the most effective means of eliminating such huts. The advantages were multiple. The bow was silent until the arrow struck. The burning arrow created sustained flame that spread through flammable structures. The low velocity meant the arrow embedded rather than passing through. And unlike tracers or incendiary ammunition, the fire arrow reliably ignited targets. Shepard's innovation represented practical problem-solving. He'd identified a specific tactical challenge, recognized that existing solutions were inadequate, and adapted technology to meet the need. His use of archery wasn't abandoning modern weapons. His patrol boats still carried heavy machine guns and other firearms. It was adding a specialized tool for a specific job. Shepard went on to write about his Vietnam experience, including Riverine, a brown water sailor in the Delta, 1967, which became required reading for Navy officers. He retired as commander and received multiple combat decorations, including the Silver Star, Legion of Merit with Combat V, 3 Bronze Stars for Valor, and 2 Purple Hearts. His death in 2004 marked the passing of one of the Riverine War's most innovative tactical thinkers. While Shepard used archery for fire starting on river operations, a completely different bow application emerged in the secret war conducted by MACV-SOG, Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, conducted classified reconnaissance and direct action missions in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam. These missions required stealth. Teams operated deep in enemy territory, often for days or weeks. Being detected usually meant being overrun and killed. Staff Sergeant Robert Graham served with Command and Control South, SOG's field units, working with Recon Team PIC in 1969. Graham was a Canadian by birth and an experienced bow hunter before joining the military. He understood archery's capabilities and limitations from years of hunting experience. According to John Plaster's book, SOG, The Secret Wars of America's Commandos in Vietnam, Graham initially experimented with Montagnard crossbows. The indigenous Montagnard tribesmen who formed the backbone of many SOG recon teams used traditional crossbows as hunting weapons. Graham tested these crossbows for tactical use, but found them underpowered for military applications. The draw weights were too light, the penetration inadequate, and the range limited. So Graham wrote to a friend back home in Canada requesting that a proper compound bow be mailed to Vietnam. He specified a 55-pound draw-weight bow with razor-edged broadhead hunting arrows. The package arrived. Graham now had a weapon capable of silently killing enemy soldiers at ranges where suppressed firearms either didn't exist or were unavailable to most SOG teams. In 1969, Graham carried his bow on a prisoner snatch mission into Cambodia's Fishhook region, an enemy-controlled area northwest of Saigon. Prisoner snatch missions required capturing enemy soldiers alive for interrogation. The team needed to take prisoners without alerting nearby enemy forces. Gunfire would compromise the mission. The bow provided a silent option. A broadhead arrow from a 55-pound compound bow would penetrate human targets lethally at ranges up to 40 to 50 yards under ideal conditions. Whether Graham actually used the bow to kill enemy soldiers during that mission isn't definitively documented in declassified sources. What's documented is that he carried it on operations and considered it a viable tactical tool. Graham's bow use represented the extreme end of MACV-SOG's willingness to employ any weapon or technique that increased mission success chances. SOG operatives carried sawed-off shotguns, Okinawan nunchucks, knives of every description, and whatever else they believed would help them survive. The bow fit that philosophy. It was completely silent, required no ammunition resupply, functioned in any weather, and was mechanically simple with nothing to break or malfunction. Beyond the American innovations, traditional crossbows played roles throughout the war through indigenous forces fighting alongside U.S. troops. The Montagnard peoples of Vietnam's Central Highlands were tribal groups who sided with American and South Vietnamese forces against the Communist North. They provided intelligence, served as scouts, and formed the primary manpower for many MACV-SOG reconnaissance teams. Montagnard forces used crossbows traditionally for hunting. These weren't modern sporting crossbows, but rather traditional designs constructed from wood and bamboo with fiber strings. The draw weights were typically 30 to 50 pounds, enough for hunting small to medium game, but marginal for combat use. The bolts were short wooden shafts with metal or sharpened bamboo points. American Special Forces soldiers working with Montagnard teams observed these weapons and occasionally tested them. Some documentation exists of Americans examining or firing Montagnard crossbows during training exercises or cultural exchanges. Photographs from the period show Montagnard soldiers demonstrating traditional weapons, including crossbows and blowguns, to American troops. These demonstrations served both cultural exchange purposes and tactical evaluation. The blowguns mentioned in period accounts were used to fire small darts, sometimes poisoned with plant-derived toxins. Whether these were actually employed in combat or remained primarily demonstration pieces is unclear from available sources. What's certain is that Montagnard forces maintained their traditional weapons alongside modern firearms provided by American forces. The cultural significance of these weapons meant they weren't abandoned even when AK-47s and M16s were available. Understanding why modern soldiers would employ bows and arrows requires understanding the specific tactical situations where they provided advantages. Silence was the primary benefit. Suppressed firearms existed during Vietnam, but weren't widely available. The suppressed pistols and submachine guns that did exist were expensive, required specialized ammunition, and the suppressors increased weapon length and weight. Bows and crossbows were completely silent. The only sounds were the bowstring releasing and the arrow impacting the target. At typical engagement ranges in jungle, these sounds wouldn't alert enemy forces beyond immediate proximity. For reconnaissance teams trying to avoid detection, this silence was invaluable. A single gunshot would reveal their position to every enemy unit within hundreds of meters. An arrow made no such announcement. The lack of muzzle flash mattered in night operations. Firearms produce bright muzzle flashes visible at long distances in darkness. Bows produced no flash. A team could eliminate a sentry at night without revealing their position. Ammunition logistics were eliminated. Arrows could be recovered and reused if intact after impact. They weighed far less than equivalent ammunition for firearms. A dozen arrows weighed perhaps 2 pounds versus several pounds for comparable rifle ammunition. For long-range reconnaissance patrols operating deep in enemy territory for extended periods, reducing ammunition weight allowed carrying more food, water, or other essential supplies. The mechanical simplicity meant nothing to break. Bows had no moving parts beyond the string. They required no cleaning, no lubrication, no maintenance beyond occasional string replacement. In Vietnam's corrosive environment where firearms required constant maintenance, this simplicity had value. Crossbows specifically offered the advantage of remaining cocked and ready indefinitely. Unlike bows requiring strength to draw and hold at full draw, a crossbow could be cocked once and kept loaded until needed. Despite these advantages, bows and crossbows remained extremely limited in use for obvious reasons. The effective range was severely limited compared to firearms. A 55-pound compound bow in expert hands might achieve accurate shots to 40-50 yards. Beyond that distance, trajectory drop and wind drift made hits unlikely. Archery weapons are specialized tools for specific, unusual situations where their unique characteristics provided advantages. Vietnam wasn't the first time modern militaries experimented with archery weapons. British Special Operations Executive considered crossbows during World War II for covert operations. What made Vietnam different was the jungle environment and the specific tactical challenges it presented. The close engagement ranges, the need for stealth, and the difficulty of resupply all created conditions where archery weapons' limitations mattered less. Shepard's riverine warfare situation he faced was unique. Fire arrows solving the problem of igniting concealed bunkers was creative adaptation to circumstances that wouldn't exist in most combat environments. SOG operations were so specialized and extreme that unconventional weapons made sense. Teams operating completely alone in enemy territory for weeks couldn't afford normal thinking about weapons and tactics. The use of bows and arrows in Vietnam never became official doctrine or widespread practice. These were individual innovations by creative soldiers solving specific problems. Shepard's fire arrows were a personal innovation that worked for riverine operations but had no application elsewhere. Graham's compound bow was an experiment that one soldier conducted, not a program multiple teams adopted. After Vietnam, military interest in archery weapons for special operations continued sporadically. Some modern special operations forces have trained with crossbows for potential use in situations requiring silent kills. The Vietnam archery story matters not because it changed warfare, but because it illustrates how soldiers adapt. When conventional solutions don't work, creative thinking produces unconventional approaches. These were soldiers recognizing problems and solving them with available resources and creative thinking. That adaptability is what made American forces effective in Vietnam, despite fighting in terrain and conditions they weren't designed for. The iconic photograph of Shepard with his flaming arrow remains one of Vietnam's most striking images. It captures the absurdity and ingenuity of that war in a single frame, and modern naval officer employing a weapon that hadn't seen military use for centuries because it was the right tool for the job. If you served in Vietnam and encountered archery weapons or other unconventional tools, share your experiences in the comments. What unusual weapons or techniques did your unit employ? For everyone else, understanding that modern warfare sometimes requires ancient solutions teaches important lessons about adaptability and creative problem-solving. Share this video to preserve these unusual stories from Vietnam that might otherwise be forgotten. The sources are in the description for those wanting deeper information about unconventional weapons in Vietnam. Subscribe for more Vietnam content examining the unexpected and unusual aspects of that war. Thank you for watching. The soldiers who employed bows and arrows in Vietnam weren't abandoning modernity. They were proving that the best weapon is always the one that solves the specific problem you're facing.